It is our first Madden and Benz Unfiltered without the Penguins for the playoffs. Not just this year, ever. So let's get right into it. Tim Benz, Mark Madden, the Pens will not be in the playoffs for the first time since 2006. The very expected firings of Brian Burke and Ron Hextall have happened. Mark, what do the Pens do from here to fill those jobs?
Well, I read Rossi's column about 10 guys they shouldn't hire, although I'm not sure he wrote it with that intent. I think they need to get either Stan Bowman, the ex-Blackhawks GM, but he's kind of informally banned by the NHL because it was on his watch that sex scandal in Chicago happened, with the video coach and the prospect. So I don't know what his status is via employability. It'd be a bit of a PR hit. I've also talked at great length about Kyle Dubas, who's out of contract with the Toronto Maple Leafs when their playoffs end. The problem they have in hiring a GM is with those 3 stars and trying to win right away, still contend, even though that's an impossibility. The humane thing to do, like putting old Yeller down, Tim, would be to tell those 3 guys, look, we can't win anymore. You know what I mean? We're not going to win a cup with you guys here still. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to turn around that quick. It can't possibly. But
real quick, Mark, was that the case going into last year, do you think, too? And did they miss that opportunity?
It's been the case for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that opportunity was right out there last year for them, and they decided to stick it out anyway.
I think that's where missing the playoffs could be a blessing, because now you don't have that streak to worry about. You can make some big picture decisions. But I look at Washington, who were never going to, totally burn it down with Ovi there. But they've at least done the right thing by punting on this season, where they traded Orlov and Hathaway and Johansson and Eller, who were all going to be out of contract at season's end. They will be unrestricted free agents. And they brought in a first-round pick, a couple second-round picks, and a couple third-round picks. That is as close as you can come to rebuilding and trying to contend at the same time. You're not destroying your team, but you are reinforcing some for the future. Whereas the Penguins, traded a second-round pick for Michael Granlund and just dug the hole deeper and didn't make the playoffs anyway. So the problem with the GM situation is you can't bring in some young assistant GM, although that Darch from Tampa, he could be the exception because he's been around a while. But you can't bring in what's the analytics guy from Carolina, Tulski. You can't bring in a analytics blogger and make him Sidney Crosby's boss. Sidney Crosby will not.
Or Mike Sullivan's boss.
Right. Even for 1 second. I know Rossi was talking about, Haley Wickenheiser, a couple female candidates. Okay. And it worries me, Tim, because, Dave Beeston said Friday, he or she, referring to the new GM, right?
Mm-hmm.
My God, what if they hired Haley Wickenheiser just to prove a point that a woman can do it, but this woman can't do it? I want a qualified woman. She's just simply not qualified. Not for this team. Not for what they think they can still do. So, and that's not a male-female thing. This Tulski guy's not qualified either. I mean, to me, virtually the only choices are Stan Bowman or Kyle Dubas. Virtually the only choices. I guess there's a Mark Bergevin in there. Jason Botterill. You could recycle Ray Shero. Although, as I keep preaching to him, I don't know why it always has to be somebody we know.
No, I don't think it does. I don't think it has to be somebody that they know. I do get your point, though, about for as much as we might not want a recycled GM that didn't work out somewhere else, there was a big difference in a younger Ray Shero taking over this job when Stahl and Fleury and Crosby and Malkin and all those guys were still in their early 20s, as opposed to the situation that we see right now. And they're trying to hang around to get as many good runs before they retire in as possible. There's a different dynamic afoot here.
No question, but the sad part is they can't win.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to say that out loud. They cannot win.
Well, let's get to the next part of that is
the series. I mean, best case scenario, they could get to a conference final if everything gets done perfect over the next couple years. And
that is a best case scenario.
Right. And that would be in 2 years at the earliest.
Okay, so let's get to one dynamic involved here, and that is Sidney Crosby's future. Beeston went to great lengths to say we never want to see Sidney Crosby play in another uniform. Well, of course they don't. Sid echoed that and said it's his preference to never play in another uniform. Well, of course not if the circumstances are perfect, but we never get that part of the answer if the circumstances allow that to be the case. I don't think Tom Brady ever planned to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer or Michael Jordan planned to be a Wizard or Peyton Manning planned to not be an Indianapolis Colt and became a Denver Bronco. Like, I don't think they ever thought those things happen until they happen. Now, as far as Sid, I think his preference would be to play out his career here, but in 2 years, what's it going to look like? And is he going to just retire then as opposed to playing somewhere else? Is that a potential eventuality here?
If you made me predict the end of Sid's career, I would say he retires when his contract's up in 2 years because he doesn't want to play anywhere else and because the team won't be any good.
It was the first time last year.
Be 20 years, Tim, a nice round number.
It was last year at this time, and I don't mean the exact date, but locker clean-out day. It was the first time I had ever heard Sid talk about his career with mortality in mind. And the first time I ever heard him really consider something like that out loud. And it really wasn't followed up upon this year. He only talked for 5 minutes at locker clean-out before he left, and it was all framed from the standpoint of playing elsewhere versus retiring. I think with the nice round number and everything else, Mark, retirement is just as much an option as it is him becoming a Maple Leaf or a Canadian.
I think more of an option.
Because
and also the one place he'd want to play would probably be in Colorado with McKinnon because they're so close.
Mm-hmm.
How good are they going to be then?
And is he going to want to be the number two? Because he would be a number two to McKinnon.
I think as long as he's top six, he could handle that, yeah.
Okay, so even if he's not the number one guy, so long as it's McKinnon and maybe no one else.
I don't know. I'm reading way too much in his feelings. I hesitate to go any further there.
Okay. How about what Sullivan had to say, particularly in, I would say, his defense overall of where the team is? And
the power play is great, Tim. It doesn't matter what the numbers say. We know it's great.
Well, specifically the power play. The one thing that Sullivan did say about the power play that I will agree with is that if you do look at the numbers, it is reflective of the whole team in that they tend to create a lot of chances. They tend to get a lot of shots, but the payoff just isn't there.
It's a crappy power play. I don't give a frig what he says. I don't even care that it's 14th, which is the mushy middle. It's a crappy power play. They don't have a power play specialist between the five guys. Lots of talent, but nobody who's like a Gonch or a Kessel, God forbid a Mario on the power play. They just have good players who do the same thing every time, and it goes in just enough to keep them hooked on the way they do things. But it's not a good power play, period.
Biggest flaw with it, Mark, is it not having a Hornqvist-type guy to stand in front of the net, or is it not having a Gonch-type guy to run it? Like, would Letang be better served playing on the left half wall or something like that?
Letang would definitely be better served playing on the left half wall. And they lack a Gonch. That's the biggest thing they lack is a Gonch up top. Although, you know where they make a mistake? If they had Sid on the right half wall instead of down low, it would be a much better power play. But then Gino wouldn't get to play where he wants, Tim. He couldn't take that one-timer that nobody can tee him up for anyway. Okay, Sid as a pure distributor on the right circle would change that power play. But Sid acquiesces to make Gino comfortable, which that's been a mistake this franchise has made since the day they were both here at the same time. They always have been presented as equals. They're not equals. Evgeny Malkin is not and never has been the player Sidney Crosby is, not even close.
Harder task, Mark, rebuilding the bottom six or bolstering the blue line this offseason?
That's a good one. I don't know.
To answer my own question, I would think it's bolstering the blue line with quality, 3-4 guys than it is the bottom six. In theory, you should be able to find bottom six players, even with their cap constraints.
Yeah, but there's so many contracts they can't get out of.
That's going to hinder you both ways, but I think it would actually hinder you more in trying to get quality defensemen that are going to play.
Let me tell you something that could happen. You read my plan on what to do, right? The Trib.
You mean talking about buying out?
Yeah.
Petrie contracts and the Granlund contract.
Especially the Granlund contract. Let me tell you something. If you made me bet right now, my problem guys are Petrie, Rutta, Granlund, and
Carter?
Carter, correct. I think it's very likely that at least 3 of those 4 will be back next year, and maybe all 4. Because they're just going to look at it, buying out contracts as a waste of money and not the impact it'll have on the team. They'll just see it as easier to keep them.
If you're a candidate, especially a candidate to be a first-time GM, if they go that route, this is not a great gig to take over, Mark, for a lot of the reasons.
Well, no, and that's why they might have a problem getting the guys I'm talking about. Although you would think that Dubas would like to have final say and more money because, Shanahan always looms over him in TO. You'd think that Stamboma would just like to get back in the game. But it's not an attractive job. I totally agree. I think they should get Kendall Roy to do it.
Succession. I fell asleep, Mark. I didn't see Succession last night. How was it? How was the first episode?
I won't give away too much.
Okay.
It went back to the style it was before the episode where Logan died, where we're just wallowing in business minutia.
Okay. Yeah, I was a little concerned it might do that, which is part of the reason I thought they might string out Logan a little longer.
The only thing that was good was Greg continues to be a total buffoon. And the dynamic between Tom and Shiv is still outstanding, although very briefly presented. And maybe that's why it's so outstanding.
Quick sidebar, because I just happened to stumble into this.
Wait, can I give a spoiler away?
Okay, quick. We're going to have to put this up here for people who are watching. Succession spoiler alert. Succession spoiler alert. Okay, Mark, give us your Succession.
Come back in 15 seconds. Come back in 15 seconds. Shiv appears to be pregnant.
Okay. And the question is whose then, obviously, right?
I would think it would be Tom's, but that's isn't that really soap opera-y?
Well, a lot of this is soap opera-y. All of it is soap opera.
This is like classic Guiding Lights.
Well, I was just going to say, I think part of your complaint about where Succession has gone, Mark, is that it actually has fallen into Falcon Crest territory. Wait, Falcon Crest? Do I have that right? Falcon Crest was a nighttime soap opera,
what
right?
show I've started watching is the new Odenkirk show on AMC, Lucky Hank.
Okay, what's that about?
He's a college professor. He's the chair of a writing department at a small college, and it's perfect for him. It's so dry, it's subtle. The first episode was great, but then again, most first episodes of every series are.
The one I've stumbled into watching, and this is sports related, is that Boris Becker documentary that's on Apple TV, which. It's funny. It's actually a lot of tennis. And I think I've heard you mention this before, Mark. Remember when tennis, especially men's tennis, was kind of fun? Like when the
personality.
Yeah, they had personality. They had divas. A lot of people talk about the women's players being divas. Divas work in tennis. That was actually good for tennis.
The game now is just incredibly boring. I have no interest.
One last hockey thing, then we'll get to football and basketball.
And that's because, by the way, the participants are boring. The game's always just tennis.
The playoffs without the Penguins. Is this still an interesting bracket to you? It is to me. I think there's a lot of intrigue here.
I'm going to watch every game of Toronto and Tampa for sure. I think New Jersey and the Rangers will be great. It's Minnesota, Colorado, correct?
I thought it was Minnesota, Dallas. Wait a minute.
Minnesota, Dallas. That's right. That's a great series. And LA, Edmonton's a great series. Those are 4 great series in the first round.
I think the President's Trophy winning number that the Bruins posted makes the East incredibly interesting from that dynamic alone, as if you need more. I think the emergence of the Devils makes that an interesting conference. And like you said,
they're ready, though.
The Devils?
No. And I think I don't trust Vanacek in goal either.
And personally, I think the West is a total toss-up, especially between Colorado, Dallas, and Edmonton. I mean, if for no other reason, Mark, forget the whole East if you want to, the potential emergence of now this becoming a Connor McDavid year where he breaks through. And I think that could happen. That's something to keep an eye on.
Edmonton has the easiest path in the West of all the teams because they would have to beat LA and Vegas, correct?
I
to
think
get to the conference final. Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's Colorado, Minnesota, and Dallas in the much tougher division. So Edmonton got a legitimate chance. When they got Ekholm from Nashville, it transformed their team. He's exactly the kind of defenseman they needed. That was the biggest get for anybody at the trade deadline.
All right, let's get some Steelers talk. Mark, how'd you feel about Ben Roethlisberger's comments regarding Lamar Jackson and being a pocket passer?
He's exactly right, but it still caused, all the Lamar disciples like RG3, the Dollar Tree Lamar Jackson to come out of the woodwork. But all Ben did was tell the truth. Then again, Tim, as we know, telling the truth in the industry today is often frowned upon.
This will be an interesting test for Ben the podcaster. I know you had Ben on from the standpoint of Ben the podcaster not too long ago, and I think his podcast is good. I think it's entertaining, but when your opinion is challenged as publicly as his is, I don't want to see him backtrack on it. I just want to say I said what I said, and I believe in it.
I don't see any reason why he would backtrack. I think what he said was...
Well, he tends to do this, the media misconstrued what I said thing all the time, and I don't want to see him do that. Like, let the media say what they have to say about your opinion, but your opinion is still your opinion, and I think there's a lot of truth to what he said.
You know how you could tell he was right was when all the Lamar apologists came on and said, well, Lamar has better stats than Ben in the pocket. Yeah, Ben has 2 Super Bowl rings. He's going to the Hall of Fame. Lamar hasn't been relevant since 2019, so shut up.
And the other thing that they didn't do was present Ben's career in the arc that it truly was, which was he was not a stand in the pocket, have the play develop before your eyes guy when he first came into the league. He made tons of plays outside the pocket. That was his reputation for the first
what he did,
8 years.
Tim? He learned. He learned how to play quarterback better. Lamar Jackson hasn't learned. Lamar Jackson's just settled.
How about what Devin Bush had to say regarding the culture of the Steelers versus going to the Seattle Seahawks?
Well, I'm not crazy about the Steelers culture, but Devin Bush is probably a reason it was bad, so F him.
I read a lot of what he said. I heard a lot of what he said. I know the guy whose show he was on, and in listening to what he said, I was just flummoxed. I was especially confused by what he said. I have no idea why my 5th-year option wasn't picked up. Well, you should.
I have a pretty good idea, Tim.
Yeah, because you didn't get off blocks. You didn't cover great down the field. You were often oversized. You didn't seem to care when it wasn't picked up. So why should they pick it up? Those are just the first few things that pop into my mind.
Yeah, I'm more interested. Did you see Peter King's report? The Steelers might be interested in Jalen Carter, trading up to get him.
If you're going to trade up and you get to 9, and I thought of this, if he's still there, that might be the best pure talent on the board. Get him.
Yeah, and I don't care about the accident. I mean, if he's allowed to play, why does that bother me?
They've had guys who have done worse things before, and they've kept them on their roster and have defended it. So, I mean, remember, my gosh, they had the press conference within the press conference when they drafted Michael Adams out of Ohio State. This would be no different of a situation.
What did Michael Adams do? Refresh my memory.
Oh, I think wasn't that like a marijuana suspension or something?
Oh, yeah, big deal. And
at the time, let's go back in time and look at it from the lens that it was presented in. It was a bigger deal back then than it was 10 years ago now.
Yeah, he was a bum, maybe because he was too high. But I would like them to draft Jalen Carter for a couple reasons. One is I think he's a real talent. 2 is it would remind us all what we should have realized a long time ago, that the Steelers are no different.
You want them to do that? You want them to trade up as opposed to hold on to their picks and use the bulk of picks on, because they might get a pick in return that's in the first.
Oh no! What I want them to do is trade up to get Paris Johnson Jr.
You would take him over Carter?
Pardon me?
You would take him over Carter?
Yeah, just because I think that you need the left tackle more.
I just think Carter's the better pure player. I would be too tempted to stay away from him if he were there. I get your point, though, because they do need the left tackle, and if Johnson's there, just as good. But I thought you outlined it perfectly in the podcast today. They'll already have their minds made up of what they want if they're going to make that trade in the first place. That trade doesn't happen unless who they want is there after pick 8.
That trade doesn't happen until after, if it's with the Bears at number 9, that pick doesn't happen until after the 8th choice is made.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about this a little bit on the podcast too. And, a lot of folks saw that report initially and blew it off because they didn't know the source where it came from. Well, if you didn't trust the source where it came from, a lot of other national sources with big names behind them said there might be some fire to this smoke.
Well, that's right. That's right. So I could see, the Paris Johnson thing. I could see the Jalen Carter thing. I just think, and we talked about this in the podcast, I think when you have pick 17 and 32, but, your roster and just the way things have gone for how long, Tim, indicates you're going to be in the mushy middle, where you finish middle, draft middle, stay middle. This is a rare chance to get a higher pick based on the draft assets you have in total, so you got to take it.
All right, Steelers fans, Penguins fans, Succession fans, want to hear from you on what you have seen over the past week or so with the Steelers and the Pens specifically. Pirates, Mark, they split with the St. Louis Cardinals, and now they go to Colorado. Colorado, as usual, giving up lots of runs. They have one of the worst team ERAs in baseball, but the bigger picture, the Pirates have managed to not sink directly as a result of the O'Neal Cruz injury. And that kind of ties into a point that you made last week. This is more or less exactly what you expected, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they could win 72 games or 75. I mean, it wouldn't put it this way though. Okay, let's use 72 as the number. Okay, what's the over under right now, Tim?
It was 72.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was 67.5 was the over under in Vegas. I said 72 wins. I think you said 70. The over under in Vegas was 67.5.
Well, if you made me bet over under 72, I'd go under 72.
I think that's the upper threshold, especially with Cruz out for 4 months.
Yes. That reminds me, were you around Pittsburgh when a guy named Thor Tolo did sports talk on 1020?
I remember Thor was probably here my first 2 or 3 years here. Yeah, so I remember him.
You know what he would do? He would take games and he would set his own lines. And let's say the Steelers played the Bengals.
Uh-huh.
And the Steelers were favored by 3 points.
Okay.
Well, then he would say, well, I see the Steelers as 6.5-point favorites. And then he would come back around and say, hey, you got to take the Bengals plus 6.5. It was one of the most absurd exercises I've ever heard.
Was this sort of the Pittsburgh version of the story you like to tell with Stan Fischler? How he always used to pick the Rangers.
Pick the Rangers to win the Stanley Cup every year, and then
rip them for not.
He would ridicule them for not winning. No, this I don't think was as well thought out as Stan Fischler. But it was Thor used to do stuff like he would play sound bites from people, right?
Okay.
And then he would splice himself in asking the questions like it was a one-on-one.
Even if it wasn't.
Yeah, he played sound bites from a gangbang. I remember specifically Tom Barrasso did.
Mm-hmm.
But then he put in he manufactured out of him asking the questions. It was unbelievable. And he presented it as, I sat down with Tom Barrasso, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you can't get away with that today. There's too many checks and balances. That's one thing that probably has been good for our
he business. Did get away with it then, Tim, because I made fun of it and eventually Smizik wrote a column about it.
Yeah.
But it was unbelievable. The point spread thing was just unbelievable.
All right, let's get to some comments here. Eric says, is Dumo finished as a Pen, or is there a chance they bring him back and keep the brotherhood together?
I see him, Tim, and I'm writing down a note to make sure I mention that on my show today. I see him as a benchmark. If you let him go, then you're finally maybe going to make changes. But it wouldn't shock me if he came back on a 1-year minimal deal.
That was closer to what I sort of expected for, say, a Brian Rust, if they were going to do that. I thought they might try to keep Rust on a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, to get about where Sid's contract was and line it up there.
Yeah, but he would have got more than that someplace else, probably Detroit.
Right, but I'm saying, if that was the outer limits of what they were willing to offer, that would have made more sense than what they got him for.
Wasn't there a sci-fi show called The Outer Limits?
No, not that I know of. How far back you going? How far back you going in time?
Way back. I seem to recall it on late night reruns.
All right, here's what Ron says. It's not about the outer limits. He says, "What is
yes,
so
there
good?"
was a TV show, Tim, The Outer Limits, September 16th, 1963 to January 16th, 1965. Science fiction.
So is that like the Lost in Space before Lost in Space kind of deal? Star Trek before Star Trek?
No, I think Outer Limits, as I remember, you remember the Twilight Zone, of course, right?
Yeah.
I think it was kind of a more sci-fi version of the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone was more supernatural.
Yeah, it's exactly what our producer Chris is texting me right now. He says,
like social satire.
Okay, all right.
The Truman Show was based on an episode of the Twilight Zone, right?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like that movie.
But Lost in Space was like a comedy, basically.
Ron says, what is so good about a GM that loses every year in the first round? Dubas, I don't want.
He was in a tough situation in an impossible division with a guy, overseeing what he did and compromising his vision. He is a true hockey visionary. he is hockey's Billy Bean. If you
Nate,
don't want him, you don't want him. But okay, let me tell you something. I'm going to take a guess here and say whoever they hire, you will be begging for Kyle Dubas in a couple years.
Nate says the Pens need an ex-player as a GM like Guerin or Drury or Yzerman. Okay,
Why?
or Hextall. I mean, Hextall was an ex-player. I know he's a Flyer, but he still counts as an ex-player.
Yeah,
I seem to remember him.
They need the best guy no matter whether he played or not. I mean, that doesn't mean those guys, aren't great GMs, Billy G and Stevie Y, but that doesn't matter. It just matters that you can do a good job.
Ken said Sid had a good year, assuming he's going to suck in 2 years as a reach. The big problem is the ridiculous Letang contract. Well, I don't think any of us or either of us assumed that Sid was going to suck.
Yeah, I think he's going to be real good in 2 years.
I think there's a fair.
I think Sid will finish his career having averaged a point per game every year.
This is what Richard says. Whoever the new GM is, must Sullivan prove that the team, by taking away his option of playing perpetually washed up or never was veteran players.
That's right. You have to somehow get rid of Jeff Carter so Sullivan can't play him. Well, that said, Sully did reduce him to a fourth-line role.
By the end, yeah, I just think it was too late by that point.
That guy's right, though. I do not see Sullivan becoming any less inflexible or stubborn. Absolutely. Guy hit it right on the head.
Well, some of the answers to his questions in his season-ending press conference, like we talked about with the whole power play thing, were evidence of that.
Sully's a real good coach. He has to decide right now moving forward if he wants to be a great coach or Dan Bilesma.
Jonah, completely agree with what Mark has often said, that the Pens are stale. Could trading Jake be a plausible way to shake things up and acquire some younger talent? Do you think this would be a problem with Sid?
Yes, it would be a problem with Sid. But Jake's contract's up at the end of this coming year. Here's what I'll say. They need to sign him to an extension this offseason or trade him this offseason. And there's no middle ground. You can't wait and see. Jake's 28 or is it 29? He's got to be beat up, all the punishment he takes. He's probably near the end of his prime. But they got to do one or the other. They can't let that situation twist during the year unless they intend to trade him at the deadline when you might get good return. Then again, what if he gets hurt?
Two from Bill here, back-to-back. No matter who the Penguins general manager is next, how many UFAs do they keep, if any? Let's start with that one, Mark.
Who are the UFAs?
Well, Dumoulin is one. Jari's another. Yeah, let's talk about Jari. What do you think is going to happen with Jari?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to predict that without the GM. If they're a scared organization that likes to cling to what they've had, they'll keep him.
The second one from Bill is, what should the Pens do in goal? All right, so there's an easy segue. He said, let DeSmith start all next year and try to find some journeyman veteran. No, I think it's the other way around. I think you get the veteran, and then you still have DeSmith back up at best, if that.
DeSmith can't possibly be on the team next year. Can't possibly. It's been proven too often it doesn't work.
And then the last thing, and I like this one best of all from Roy, hopefully the new GM will write the plan down.
I like it.
Whammy. Good way to end it. All right, Mark and I will be back next week for Madden Benz Unfiltered. Check out the Madden Monday podcast if you haven't already. And next week we'll get into the NHL playoffs as they will be midway through round one without the Penguins for the first time since 2006.